Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the characteristics of life and also levels of organization in environmental science. We're not going to start with cells. We're going to start with the individual organism, okay? But we're going to focus on the characteristics of life or characteristics of living things. All right, going to skip a couple things here. These aren't really important for our class. All right, the first thing is you're going to be made up of cells. All right, you can be unicellular or multicellular, but you have to be made up of cells. All right, and like stuff like viruses are not made of cells. All right, so that's one thing strike against viruses, but made of cells. Second thing is you need to be able to reproduce on your own. There's either asexual or sexual reproduction. Asexual is offspring formed from one parent. Like bacteria is a great example of asexual reproduction. Sexual would be an egg and sperm coming from two different parents coming together to make one organism. Humans, great example of sexual reproduction. Right? Viruses do not do that. Viruses have to rely on the host to take on their DNA and replicate themselves. So viruses cannot reproduce on their own. Number three is you need to be able to contain DNA or RNA. There are some organisms that contain only RNA. But this determines your inherited traits. So when our egg and sperm come together, 23 chromosomes from the egg, 23 chromosomes from the sperm in humans come together to make an offspring, 46 chromosomes. But that DNA is what passes those traits on to your offspring. Number four, you need to be able to grow and develop. You have some kind of life cycle. The tadpole going and turning into the frog, laying eggs, going to a tadpole frog, a life cycle. Great example right there. It must be to grow and development. Viruses do not grow and develop. They're sort of built. They don't grow and develop though. All right, the next is you need to be able to obtain and use materials and energy. This is like basic metabolism. So autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs, like plants, make their own food. They go through photosynthesis. Heterotrophs, like you and I or the wolf in the backyard, they have to consume some kind of food, right? And it can be something small like a grasshopper eating grass. That's the heterotroph, not making his own food. All right, you also need to be able to respond to your environment. So our environments are always changing, and you need to be able to respond to that to live, and like that's part of being a live living organism. But it's also things you might any type of stimuli really. So say someone walked in my classroom right now with a pizza, I'm going to smell that pizza. So it's going to go in my nose and smell the pizza. Then it's going to go into my brain and trigger. I want some pizza. That's me responding to that environment, right? It could also be like a bacteria sticking a needle into the agar. The bacteria is going to sort of move away from that needle. It's stimuli. It's moving away from its reacting. The next is you need to maintain a stable internal environment. That's called homeostasis. The process how organisms keep that internal condition stable. If I go outside and in summertime I go for a jog, I'm going to become sweaty. That's my body cooling down to keep a stable internal environment. If I go in the back and do a bunch of jumping jacks, my heart rate's going to elevate. But then I'm going to rest and it's going to calm back down. Maintaining that stable environment. That's homeostasis. And the last thing is evolution. You need to be able to evolve. So although an individual organism like myself, I'm going to turn gray and old. I'm not going to evolve. I'm not going to develop a new trait, right? But over time, a group, however, of any type of organism can evolve and change over time, right? So an individual does not evolve. A group of an organism or a population do. Next thing we're looking at is the levels of organization in environmental science, okay? We're not going to start with the cell. We're going to start with the individual organism. So you start with the individual organism. That's all the organ systems of a body functioning to make one, like a grasshopper or a deer or a human, right? The next is a population. That's the same. That's a group of the organisms of the same species. And same species have to be to interbreed and make a viable offspring. But same species. Very important to know that there, okay? So like all the grasshoppers in my backyard, that's the population of that same species. All the humans in my classroom, of our world, of our biosphere. Right? You define the area. The next is a community. A community is all the biotic factors in the living area. So that's all like that's populations, but it's also all the populations. Like all the go in my backyard, all the deer, all the rabbits, all the frogs, all the grasshoppers, all the humans, my dog. Also all the plants and animals, all the plants, all the trees and all the grass, and all the flowers, my garden, all that type of stuff. That's my community, all the living stuff. The next one is the ecosystem. That's all that living stuff. Plus all the abiotic or non-living stuff. So like the amount of water, the kind of minerals in the ground, the climate, the wind, the rainfall, all that type of stuff. It all goes into like non-living stuff, all the rocks, all that non-living stuff. And last is the biosphere. That's all those ecosystems combined together. And what does that make? It makes our globe. So our biosphere is our globe. So just remember individual organism, population, community, ecosystem, and then biosphere. And that's the levels of organization. So focus on the characteristics of living things we mentioned earlier, and then look at the